so welcome to the session. What we're looking at is multiple means, and I'm kind of developing maybe some muscles, some different methods that you might use. And sometimes when we're learning something new, our muscles get a little sore, and that's kind of what micro-teaching all gives us an opportunity to do, is to try something new and to develop some more muscles as far as teaching goes. So I was having a little bit of fun with the title on that. So just for setup, it looks like most of you are pretty good. You've gone to the Menti at the top of the screen there. We're going to be using that for polls, etc. And hopefully you're able to follow along quite nicely in the Teams to see my slides. So if for any reason something doesn't seem to work, don't be afraid to kind of come on your mic. We're a small enough team. Just let me know if something's not working. I did notice that after I got started, even though I shared my computer audio, that there was a little blip in the audio, and so I may have to just quickly stop sharing my screen and reshare when we get to the videos and stuff like that. Okay. If you're curious, and if you've never done this before, there's a way that you can actually turn on closed captioning in a Teams meeting. So I'm going to turn that on. And if you wanted to do it, if you're not on a Mac, all you have to do is go to your Teams interface and you click on the ellipsis and then come up to turn on live captioning, and there's a preview. And so if I were to slide my window over with all of you there, you can see that it's now closed captioning in my window. It's a setting that students can turn on for their own computers if they wanted to run that. And I may revisit, depending on time, some different ways that you can offer closed captioning because, as we're well aware, the voice quality or the sound quality sometimes can be quite different, and so lots of students would benefit from having closed captioning running on their computers, English as additional language learners, etc. It's not perfect, but if you wanted to give that a try while you're watching and following along this afternoon, that'd be great.
It works wonderfully well, you know, Sherri, on PowerPoint also. So I normally have closed captioning as I'm teaching.
Yeah, there's actually different ways to kind of do that. We're a small enough team a small enough group this afternoon that if you have a question or something, you know, if you've got a lot more people, and I see there's Hubert's question there. So sometimes it's just easier when we're a smaller group, just for people to pop on and ask your question as it pops into your head. So don't worry about being kind of formal and waiting for an official time when I ask, or you can just pop something in the chat if you'd like to as well. And if anybody's having trouble finding the chat, let me know and I'll help you find that as well.
So Sherri, should we go to the Mentimeter or should we continue to stay on this website?
The Menti is, so what you can actually do is you can run it on your phone or you run it on another browser window. Once you're in Menti, you will be able to see the slides as well. But the Menti is, well, you can do for students who are, for example, using a phone, they can actually follow along really quite nicely with the Menti slides on their phone, and when there's an engaged, like an activity for them to answer. So I've just imported my PowerPoint. You'll see in a minute up to my Menti, and then you'll be able to follow along in either platform. It doesn't really matter. Okay. All right. Whoops. So just what are we up to this afternoon? We're going to, hopefully at the end of the session, in the 50 minutes that we have, you're going to be able to know what the 3 principles of a universal design for learning, and do they kind of apply in post-secondary school learning environments. And I think we're seeing more and more people are actually seeing that that universal design can have a huge impact on all our students in post-secondary school education. I've got a little Blackboard Ally piece. I've kind of been shifting it around a little bit because I want to be respectful of our time, and if folks know a lot about Ally and they're not really too curious about too much of it, then I'll just kind of defer that. But I will go along and show you what Blackboard Ally is and what it can do as far as providing alternative formats, which is actually meeting very nicely one of the principles of universal design for learning. And then also, hopefully at the end of it, you're going to either be able to recommend or integrate into your course a new app that you might like to give a try for, that's going to be engagement, representation, action, and expression. Because one of the focuses of micro-teaching is this idea of assessment and and actually the formative assessment piece. I've kind of done some rearranging of a typical way that I would do this workshop that kind of focuses on that first, which is not necessarily the way I would normally go to assessment first. So let's plow ahead and we'll see how we do on each of these learning outcomes as we go. So I've got a screenshot, or I've got a picture up there for you. And so what I'm doing is I'm sharing some information with you. And this is what we do when we're in a class. When we're in a class, we start our session, we want to kind of engage them right off the bat. So we may throw a picture up, or we may have something that we want our students to kind of interact with. And we think we're being pretty clear on what it is that we're asking them to engage in. We think our pictures are clear, we think our language is clear, we think a lot of things are really clear. And yet, if I were to ask you to use the Menti and just pop in, what are we talking about based on the image today? Just play along with me based on this image. So you can either put your answer in the chat or you can use the Menti. And we'll just see if anybody's put one in yet. Not yet. So what are we talking about based on this image? What might the topic be? You can hop on your mic, you can pop it in the chat, or you can put it up to the Menti. I'll just wait a minute until we get someone. Okay, so a sax player and a face. Now, wait a minute. Different facets of learning. Perception. Okay, so I see a saxophone player. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? That when we give students information, we think that they're all processing that information in the same way that we are actually giving the information. And yet, just the fact that some of you said, I see a face, and I see a saxophone player, we might have a problem in what we're doing when we're presenting information. Just something to be sensitive to. So CAST, which is the Center for Applied Science and Teaching, actually looked at brain and what happened in a brain in 3 different individuals, more than 3 individuals, but this is just 3 individuals' brain scans, when we asked a person to do an activity. It wasn't the one that I asked you to do, which was to look at this image and then give me some feedback. It was actually a physical motor skill that I use sometimes in other workshops. But each brain, interestingly enough, perceived that activity differently. So the image is kind of, that typical optical illusion, but we think it's like I've shown you an image and I'm sure you're all following along and you are understanding what it is I'm saying. And yet the students' brains are processing that differently. It could be because past learning experiences, backgrounds, educational exposure, all of those kinds of things means that we're actually interpreting the information that we're sharing with our students very differently. So same task, interpreted differently by students. And so what Universal Design for Learning does is it helps us understand that there's a way to kind of optimize our teaching and learning based on insights on how our brain's working, how we're processing that information, how we learn, and hopefully by kind of acknowledging that everyone is learning and have some perceived differences, that we can actually, by using the principles of Universal Design for Learning, help our students understand our content that we're giving them in much more, not easier ways, but there's going to be different ways that we can get that information into their brains. So it does have some roots in architect, the idea that, gee golly, I can't get into the building. And so the buildings were the architecture. And then people started to look at, well, if we need to make our physical environment accessible, what about our products? What about the things that we're also consuming with our eyes and our ears and everything like that? It provides building access to buildings. It provides access to, quote, school or work and products. And if we actually think of Universal Design for Learning principles, it eliminates the fact that we built the beautiful course or we built the beautiful building, and now we realize, oh crap, not everyone can use that. Not everyone can actually access what we're trying to do. So what we want to do is we want to eliminate the need to kind of go back and kind of go, okay, well, I did this, but I should have thought that it might not be accessible or understandable or perceived by everyone equally. And it really is interesting because lots of folks know that Universal Design for Learning perhaps had its roots in accessibility, meaning a physical disability, like the ramps, but we all benefit. We've all used a ramp in the last little while. We've all had our hands filled and maybe hit those buttons when we were allowed on campus to open the door for us. So we all benefit. And what we don't want to do is kind of fall into this trap of, you know, if you ask me, I'll provide you the ramp. What we want to do is we want to actually provide the ramping right from, as we're developing our lesson plans and everything else. So COVID, interestingly enough, has taken an opportunity for us to really look at how are we actually giving information out to our students. And I think back in March, we were like, oh my gosh, just get the content up there and let them consume it. And so it became very, very text heavy. And yet there are lots of ways that we can actually share content with our students that we want to kind of look at. And how can we chunk our lessons? How can we do them in different ways so students are all perceiving what we're trying to teach in those different ways? So we've definitely adapted, and I think there's some really good things that have come out of COVID. So here are the 3 principles for Universal Design for Learning. And so they're looking at different kind of primary networks in people's brains. There's that recognition, you know, aha, the strategic learning, the how am I going to demonstrate this, and effective learning, which is the engagement. And I think the questions at the bottom of this are interesting. So the recognition representative, that means what are we going to put into our lesson, right? How are we going to take our content and share it with our students? The middle one there, which is where we're going to kind of focus most kind of primarily, which is a bit of a flip for me, is the action and expression, because we want to kind of get this idea of how do we build into our lesson planning the idea of what we call formative assessment. How can we check in with our students frequently to see if they've kind of got what it is that we are teaching so far, so we know, aha, we're good to go ahead, or whoops, darn, I may need to backtrack a little bit. So we've got that, what are we going to teach? You know, what are the different ways that we're going to do that? How are we going to represent our material? We've got the action and expression for, okay, what have you learned so far? Are you with me? You know, those kind of cricket responses that we sometimes get on online learning when we all ask the question, and I catch myself doing it all the time, which is, are there any questions? You know, how can we kind of get that, pull it out of them? And then the engagement, obviously, it's really important that students understand why the heck are we doing this. If we don't understand why, that's where we don't get the engagement. So those are the 3 primary networks of Universal Design for Learning. It's based on CAST guidelines, and I will share with you at the end of the presentation a bit later where you can get the content to my to all of the resources that I'm going to share with you. And I'll put that up at the end, and if I forget, somebody yell at me. But the website actually can take me to this really lovely grid, and then I can kind of explore things like, well, what do you mean by action and expression? And what do you mean by use multiple media for communications? And so then it actually breaks it down for me, and I can get some ideas and some suggestions for how to incorporate that into my teaching. So the CAST website is actually quite a useful place to go to kind of get some more teaching on what are multiple means of engagement, what are multiple means of representation, what are multiple means of action and expression, and how can I incorporate those into my teaching. So I have a question for you based on what we've done so far, and it was fast and furious, but I have 3 choices for you. The question is, what are the 3 principles of UDL, and are they representation, action, figures, and energy? Are they engagement, marriage, and life? Are they engagement, representation, and action and expression? So I see some people are answering in there now. And so this is an example of kind of checking in with students as we're teaching. It's that idea of formative assessment that we're going to kind of bounce back and forth a couple of times this afternoon about that. All right, let's start just a little bit before we go into the assessment piece, which is I want to just talk about the multiple means of engagement. Obviously, if we have our students grasping the why the heck am I learning this, it can motivate them. And it's kind of interesting, one of the things that we saw this morning while we were all trying to put together our little 15-minute sessions is this idea of using outcomes. And oftentimes we'll do them at the beginning of a lesson. I did it at the beginning. I said, here's what I'm hoping that you want to do, or what we'll accomplish in this session this afternoon. But we often kind of forget that we want to check in every so often throughout the lesson to not only help them see that, yes, we've done something, but also why are we doing this? So why are we doing, you know, this idea of universal design for learning? Well, we're doing it because hopefully students will be more engaged. We're doing it because students will hopefully perceive our content easier. We're doing it because there's different ways that students can help us know that they know. And so it's that why piece, that engagement piece really helps them understand this is why we're doing this. Sometimes, you know, one of the complaints I often hear students say is, I don't know why we just spent the last hour doing this. Well, sometimes we need to make it very clear. And with choice and autonomy and peer collaboration and all those good things that we can do in our online learning environments, we can hopefully have students make connections with the content. So that really means that participation, not only with the course content, but in community with each other. And again, I think the community with each other can be really challenging when we're in this online environment. So the connecting with others through introductions and discussions and things like that, and the working with others, even if we are in online environments, how can we kind of get our students working with each other so we are kind of engaged and exploring? So I'm going to give you a couple of websites that I thought were kind of interesting. One is this one, and again, if you're following along on your computer anywhere, I'm just going to put in the chat. Oops, I hope. There we go. I'm just going to put the link in the chat for you, and you can join me on this website if you'd like. It's got some different just icebreakers, which sometimes icebreakers can be used at the beginning of a course, but they can also be used to just start your classes. And one of the things that I heard this week that I thought was really kind of smart was sometimes we use icebreakers effectively to get our students to kind of make the connections with the activity that we're doing, much like I did with that image. But then we don't do them anymore. And then when students have high stakes presentations and stuff like that, we've never said, hey, Hubert, would you like to share your screen with me and you lead the little icebreaker for this week? And they've never done that before, and all of a sudden they have to manage the kinds of things that we've had to manage and Collaborate and Big Blue Button and WebEx and Teams and Zoom, and they're nervous. And so sometimes giving them an opportunity to actually engage in doing some of those activities like they have to do for high stakes presentations, having an opportunity to do that, what's not and it's not for Pope's marks can be really, really helpful. So that's just one website that you can kind of explore.
You know, Sherri,
yes.
You know, one of the challenges that I am trying to come to terms with is how much is enough when it comes to getting to use a lot of these, what I call boys with their toys. And when I talk about toys, I'm talking about various digital forms of expression. And is that, you know, really distracting for the students, and does it take away from the process of learning? So right. I'm just trying to battle. With,
I really like Thomas Tobin, and I'll refer to his book right at the end. Thomas Tobin is a chap who has written a book about how to apply the principles of universal design for learning in your courses. And the one thing I really like about his comment is the idea of +1. So I think what you're saying is there are so many tools out there, but could we possibly incorporate too many tools? This afternoon, I am actually going to be showing you a couple of different tools, but it's at your discretion to kind of realize when will this be an engaging tool and fits this particular moment in time, versus this is me trying to explore and engage my students, and perhaps I've given them actually too many things all at once. And so, for example, if I were doing a course, I might just use Menti and that's it, because my students are going to be comfortable. They're going to get onto the website. They know how to, you know, use the little tools, the polls and that sort of thing, and they're comfortable. And I might not go Menti, Padlet, and if people don't know what Padlet is, hopefully I'll have an opportunity to do that. But we want to kind of be a little more sensitive to the fact that they too are learning all these tools, but we also want to engage our students, right? I put another resource up there. It's called Engage the Online Learner, and again, the link, let me just pop it in there. Yeah, that's it. It's in the chat if you want to follow along, but again, I will give you access to my handouts and you'll be able to get back to these. But again, it's just some ideas of how to engage the online learner. And so there's both activities and there's actually, whole chapters on, it's quite a free book, which I found interesting and kind of read through some ideas just for sort of checking in. So I thought that was kind of an interesting resource that was free and available for us. I'm now going to do the weird thing, and now I'm going to actually go. So just different ways to engage our students. I think both those resources might be interesting for you. But now I'm going to make a flip. Normally what I would do is I would go and talk about representing your content. But what I want to do, because we are trying to get this idea of actually doing sort of formative assessment leading up to perhaps summative assessment, is I want to kind of look at some of the principles of universal design for learning around action and expression, which if we were to interpret that in sort of faculty vocabulary, it would be, how do I know they know, or how can I check in with my students? And the formative are the, give me feedback now as to how we're doing, and the summative is the kind of high stakes marking. So we know that assessment should be ongoing, varied, and explain, and authentic is always good, because what we really do want to be doing is checking in and making sure that what we're asking our students to do as a form of assessment is something that sometimes in counseling accessibility services, we often have the thought of, well, the student will never be able to do this in the real world. And I go, okay, let's explore that, because we might say, a blind student could never do massage therapy, and yet there's a whole clinic in Montreal that's actually has massage therapists, all who are low vision or blind. So, sometimes we think it's not possible, and yet we just have to kind of explore what is possible. So we do want to get to the authentic assessment piece. We do want it to be ongoing. The idea of varied is interesting, because I think we all get tired of doing the same kinds of things. And explained, again, why are we doing the assessment? What's the purpose of this? What are we hoping to get out of that? And how can we make it authentic? And you can see some of the things over here for action and expression for UDL is things like guide appropriate goal setting. In other words, assessment shouldn't be once and big. Assessment means to be pieced. How do I get some development along the way? What are some multiple tools that I can actually use, even as a student who's perhaps performing the assessment? How could I be doing some of the tools that actually shows you that I know, that may not just be answering questions? So we've got the three main types of assessment. The diagnostic would be, if I had asked you, what do you guys know about universal design for learning? So normally if I do face-to-face workshops, I ask people to write on the back of their name tag, what's the first couple of words that comes into your mind when I say universal design for learning, and I can walk around the room really quickly and look what people have written on the back of their name tags. So that's an example of diagnostic. Formative is the kind of thing that I did when I said, okay, did you get those three principles? And yes, the answers were pretty silly, but led you to kind of just recheck in with, okay, yeah, the three forms are representation, action and expression, and engagement. And then the last one would be that summative one. So Bloom's taxonomy, if you're not familiar with it, there's a wonderful digital version of it, which is really, really helpful for looking at words. Like sometimes when we want our students to do something and we're trying to phrase some words about what it is you want them to do, we often do the can you explain, can you define, that kind of stuff, but we want to move our students, just like we want them to do for real world situations, from that kind of simple thing to what are you going to do in this situation. So that's where group work and things like that can really be helpful when we want to check in to see how our students are doing, not as a summative for marks, but just as an opportunity to engage with each other. I thought it would be fun to kind of introduce a few other kind of formative evaluations. One's called a graffiti wall. A graffiti wall is just a way that you can use a whiteboard, or you can use, there are some apps online, so a whiteboard and Collaborate, where a student just come in and they kind of put their thoughts down, and everyone can kind of see what their initial thoughts are. So you might want to check in. Sometimes we get, again, stuck on that, any questions, and instead maybe what I should do is ask a question and ask people to go up to a graffiti wall. Another one that I can use for that kind of formative assessment is you ask your students to propose a quiz question. And so they might get into groups and come up with some quiz questions based on some content that's so far. So I might have you go into groups and say, okay, I want you to come up with a question that would allow me to evaluate if you have any understanding on any of the principles of universal design for learning. Sometimes actually giving them the wrong answer and having them to break up into groups and saying, what's wrong with this, and have them do that. The roll of the dice is kind of fun. It's one that's a new one for me. So what you do is you get a dice, and based on these 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, I want to remember. 2, I learned something. 1 word to sum up what I've learned is number 3. Something I already knew would be number 4. 5, I'm a little bit confused about, or aha, I had that as a moment. And you roll the dice, and based on the roll of the dice, we have a 3. And so what you all are going to do in the next slide is you're going to give me 1 word of something that you've learned today. So, whoops, if I can get this to go forward. So what's 1 word if you were to sum up today, something you've learned, 1 word? And so what I can do is kind of check in to see whether you're with me at all, and I'll wait for a few minutes for people to populate that, and they'll give me an opportunity to sip my coffee. So we're looking for what's 1 word, if you could use 1 word to sum up, and you can put it in the chat or turn on your mic. So I'm looking for 1 word. There we go, assessment. Okay, 1 person's idea is assessment. The nice thing about Menti, just a side thing, is sometimes we'll have people who will not participate in class because they don't want to turn on their mic. They want to be anonymous. They don't want to embarrass themselves. And so what the Menti platform allows me to do is to kind of check in, but students can take a risk and not worry about being wrong in front of their classmates, whereas turning on their mic or turning on or in the chat, they can be actually identified. So it's kind of a nice way to do that. All right, so we got the idea. I think the roll of the dice was just kind of a fun one. I hadn't heard of that one before, and I kind of liked it as a fun way to kind of check in with students. All right, this one, I'm going to play this video, and if you don't hear the sound, if you can just quickly let me know, and if it's not playing the video, I'll actually come back. I'll have to stop sharing and then I'll just reshare my screen, because I did notice there was a slight disconnect with my audio. So just let me know, someone quickly just jump on your mic if you can't hear.
That is true. But can you tell us why is it so?
I'm not sure about anybody else, but there was audio just for a moment and then there was nothing.
Oh, okay. All right. So what I'll do is I'll just stop screen sharing, and then I'll just re-screen share again, and I'll play that again. All right. So just give me a second.
Also, the video wasn't playing continuously. It's kind of lagging.
Okay, that could be just my internet connection, which is unfortunate, but okay, let's give it another try. No sound yet.
No sound.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to answer any questions that I have and you may have about history. Now, Professor Stuffy, welcome to our show. Very glad that you could make us. Now, the first thing I would like to know, and I think is on everybody's mind here, is history. What is it good for? What is it good for, you ask? Well, it is very good for telling the history of the world. Yes, that is true. But can you tell us why should we know it?
So I think what I like about that is called a three-headed expert. is that you ask for people who are obviously pretty comfortable, you know, being in front and center, but you ask for 3 volunteers, and then you would pose a question. I've used this in situations that are really kind of, I'll give the example. It's a call plan to protect, and it's a way to help volunteers who are working with us just be aware of the types of abuse they might see in children. So sexual, neglect, emotional, and what's the other one? Physical. And so I actually have used this because that can be, you know, talking about sexual abuse and physical abuse can be kind of uncomfortable, but I just want to kind of make sure that they've actually picked up what the different kinds of abuse can be. And so I've asked, you know, 3-headed expert, you know, you get 3 people and they take the turns with the words and you rotate around. Now, the funny thing was is that every time we got to actually labeling one of the kinds of abuse, it always fell on one person. That was just kind of funny timing. But it's actually quite a fun way to kind of check in when you've given students a concept, and then you just kind of say, okay, I need a 3-headed expert. I'd like to ask some questions about what we've covered so far, and you get some people to come up, and as you can see, it does some quite humorous results. So that's called a 3-headed expert. So again, what I'm showing you is just some ideas that you might do for some formative assessment as you're kind of progressing through a class. Whiteboards I already talked about. Polling apps is what I've kind of modeled using the Menti. There are the Blackboard testing tools, and sometimes people will kind of say, well, I'll set them up, you know, in a quiz afterwards to find out what the students are doing. But sometimes in the moment, as we chunk our classes, can be more effective than afterwards. Infographics is another way that students can actually demonstrate that they actually know something and they're very visual. And I apologize, they didn't pull up an example for this. And simulation programs can be really highly effective as well to kind of just check in to find out if students can actually demonstrate that they know something. So they would actually do a simulation of some sort. So those are some really fast ways that we can kind of incorporate it within a lesson, checking in that formative assessment to find out what do students know. So if people are okay with kind of keeping those in mind, I'm now going to backtrack a little bit and kind of look at some ways that we can do representation of our content throughout our class. But while I'm doing that, I also want you to think any of the tools that I introduce, could you actually use them also as formative assessment tools as you're working through a session class, okay? So, sorry, that's a little out of place, that one. I do want to check in before we go too much further and just ask quickly, how familiar, and if you can just jump on your mic, how familiar, because we're talking about representation of content and multiple means of representation of content, how many of you are familiar with and are comfortable with Ally? And I was looking to see, there we go. And how many of you are kind of going, I got it, I get it all, I get what it does. And depending on what the response is for this, I'll just quickly go through. We did do a basic Blackboard Ally session. So I see one person saying not so much. Anybody else can use that slider just to give me an idea of what do you know about Blackboard Ally, and whether or not I should kind of just spend maybe 3-4 minutes on Blackboard Ally. So I've got 2 people that it looks like have responded so far. I'll just wait for either, again, just jump on the mic or just respond on the Menti. Okay, so I'll go quickly through what Blackboard Ally is. It does align with Seneca's accessibility policies, which it actually is kind of interesting because when you scroll through that, and where is it? I saw it. There was one that was wonderful, and now oh, there we go. This second last one says, ensure that wherever possible, all college products and documents are accessible and multiple formats. How interesting. Kind of made my little UDL heart glow, because that's really what we're looking at, or what are some different tools and ways that we can actually represent for content for students, which is exactly what Blackboard Ally does. It allows students to actually have multiple means of representation for some of your content, and it does align with the Universal Design for Learning principles. It helps make content more accessible, and again, it benefits all learners. So for students, what it allows is it allows alternative formats such as OCR'd. Now that means optical character recognition, meaning that if I was, and for the most part when we talk about universal design for learning, we're talking universal, not accessible, like not disability design for learning. We're looking for universal, which means all learners. So when we're looking at some of these formats, we're looking for, OCR means that I could use a program that would allow it to read it out loud for me. HTML, if our students are actually on their phones, it's really nice to know that the HTML format is quite easy. When we first went online with COVID, we had a lot of students who were pulling up in front of McDonald's or pulling up in front of the college and on their phones and trying to go through our classes. Electronic Braille is for students who are who do have low vision or blind. Beeline Reader, it's like, what the heck is Beeline Reader? So I thought somebody might ask that. So this is what Beeline Reader does. It takes some content. Let me just see if I can make that a little bigger. It takes some content and so text, and it puts it into a format that they're looking at the brains of folks who maybe have attention deficit disorder or have executive functioning where concentration can be difficult, and it actually engages one more aspect of their brain, the kind of visual processing part. And you'll see that as it starts one line, it changes to blue, and then the next line for tracking privileges, or sorry, support, actually then goes to the next line with blue text. And then it fades to black, and the next line is black, and then it fades to red, and the next line is red. So it's just an interesting format that a student can get when they actually use the download versions that are available to them. And translated version is, I think we're still working on that one. Faculty, what does it do for you? That's what students get. They get the different formats, so they can have an audio file, they can have just Beeline Reader, they can have a tagged PDF, they can have HTML. For us as faculty members, it indicates if a file is accessible or the content is accessible, and then provides those tools to actually fix it. So when it does not automatically fix those issues for us though. So when we're online and we see something like this on our course content, you might think, do students see that? No, all the students see is they can download now a different version. So maybe it's an article you want them to read, and now they could download an audio file. That's cool. That aligns with multiple means of representation. That's a UDL principle. And so they could listen to it. But they don't see these little indicators. The only one that sees these little indicators is the faculty member. And what those little indicators do is they tell you this is a file that's good to go, this file may have some issues, and this file might really cause some difficulties for someone who might be low vision or blind or having access in your materials. There's going to be some things that are going to be extremely difficult for them.
Sherri, a question on color contrast. I've experimented with color contrasts, and when I run it through an accessibility checker, even on Microsoft, it tells me that you need to move away from color contrast, and I move it all to black, which is the standard formatting, and then it says it's all right, it's now accessible. So I'm a little concerned or trying to understand, typically you put in a color contrast to say red on black content to basically highlight a particular date or something like that, right? And are there limitations in terms of color contrast? And And
so I think that's the interesting thing, is that when we start to look at, again, we may be thinking, well, what about someone who has colorblind, and so they may not perceive those colors as easily as we would like them to. That one example that another faculty member had in one of the sessions that we were doing was a chart, and he was really quite confused. And again, I was trying to approach it from, we're not really looking at this for someone who's low vision or blind and having difficulty with your chart, but who else might be impacted by that. And so when you're looking at things like color contrast or a chart or a graph that in this particular case was multiple pages long, and the header for the columns was only on the first page. And it was rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of numbers. And it really helped us to have a really interesting conversation, which was, well, in the real world, is this how a student in this particular situation would be actually calculating the formula? And the faculty kind of went, well, no. And I said, well, why are we having students do it this way? And, they said, well, they have to understand the numbers. Granted, yeah, they really do need to have the numbers, but industry, again, when we talk about assessment and how do we assess our students, industry would say, I don't want them using a rows and rows and rows of numbers where maybe they track across and lose their place and put the wrong number in. I want them to use the app. So I think it helps us when we kind of stop and go, who might benefit from this color? And you're saying, well, I'm trying to highlight or really emphasize the information in the text body to help it pop off the page. And that's where sometimes as multiple means of representation can be really interesting, in that we often give really important information through text. What if I also did a little video, or not a video, I'm sorry, just a little audio accompaniment which I can now get with Ally. I can download an audio copy of that, and then I might hear that it's due on Friday that I may not see on your visual information. So that's what I think these whole multiple means of representation can really kind of help us stop and look and think, what might be the problems with some of this? Why does this have this red indicator? Well, it was really basically because for someone who was low vision or blind, they weren't going to know that that was a stop sign because the alt tag wasn't on the picture. But some of the other ones are a little more difficult. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because our purpose this afternoon isn't Ally, but I was asked if I could just do a really quick, fast, broad overview, and I did want to provide that overview really quickly. There's a program at Seneca. So one of the ways that we can get this when we do this alternative downloads is audio, and some students are really excited about doing that. But you may not be aware that in the college itself, we have a program that's called Read Write Gold for Windows, or sorry, for Read Write Gold for reading. It does reading, it does spelling, it'll change files to audio format. And sometimes when we posted, like this is a perfect example, if I were actually wanting to have that read out loud to me using any kind of software, I can't because it's an image right now. And what Read Write Gold does was it allows students, say for students who are in anatomy and physiology or labeled diagrams in a flight aviation program on, very detailed descriptors of mechanics or something like that, and they're all labeled diagrams. Read Write Gold will actually allow you to have the text read out loud to you. And any Senecan, and again in my handout, you'll be able to get to how any Senecan can download that program and put it on their computer so they could have anything read out loud to them. So Blackboard Ally is a great tool that helps faculty provide that alternative format without really having to do anything. But if students are still looking for further support because they'd like to listen to something and they just can't get Blackboard Ally to give them a version of something that you've asked them to do, like for example, a website, they can also use Read Write Gold to go listen. One of the comments that we heard when we first went to online learning was students were going, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed with all the text. I'm going to play this video. I think this faculty member really makes an interesting comment on multiple means of representation. So I'll play that, and hopefully I haven't seen another flash on my audio, so you should be good. Just let me know if you can't hear it, okay? Nope. We may have a spinning bullet here. And if this doesn't go right away, I'll just flip through it and just make a comment. So it looks like my internet's a little bit slow. I'll talk while it's loading. What she talks about is, she says normally what we do is we post maybe a textbook reading. But what she does is she provides a textbook reading, but she also provides questions first. So she says, here's the questions. And based on the questions, I want you to go do either this chapter reading, or I want you to watch these videos, or I want you to go on this internet web search. And I want you to then be able to answer these questions. And so she effectively breaks the content into multiple means of representation. You can read it, you can go watch something, or you can go do some exploring on your own. But when you're finished, you all should be able to answer these questions. So that is taking a little while to load. So that's what she was actually talking about. So hopefully I captured that well. Lindsay Maslin was her name. And I just really liked the way she kind of explained what she did with her textbook reading to demonstrate that idea of multiple means of representation. How many of you are familiar with Edpuzzle? Anyone? All right, well, what I'm going to have you do is there's a bit.ly there that I'm going to hopefully put in the chat if I remember to put it in my document here. So just give me 1 second. That's not that. Just give me 1 second to find a document that I can paste in there. And I'm going to get you to go watch this little video. And it's representing content, but it's also doing something else. Well, it's doing that, and that's, you're not going to be able to proceed until you actually answer some questions. So if you click on that link that's in the chat, your nickname can be anything, and then just say join class, and then watch and answer the videos. And the video is going to stop. You're not going to be able to play forward unless you answer the questions. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Somebody can just let me know when you're back.
Hi, Sherri, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to say I can't actually, I've been struggling. I can't actually send anything in the chat. I don't know why my Teams isn't working. I just wanted to say, yeah, I'm back. That was cute, and okay. I am here. I just wanted to say so I am here.
People are coming back. Thank you, Jody. You know what, if you need a little bit of help afterwards, maybe just stay and I'll see if I can help you get the chat, all right? So yeah, that's another example. It's multiple means of representation in that perhaps I would ask students to read an article. Now, obviously I'd be a little more intentional, but I could get a TED Talk or something like that. But the formative assessment is kind of built into that activity in that as they're doing the video watching, they stop, the video stops, and you can ask a question. It can be a really quick, fast check-in to find out, are they actually benefiting from watching this video, or are they not even engaged at all? All right, so that's Edpuzzle. I'm aware of the time. We have about 1 minute left, and I know that there are some things that I didn't get to, I'm going to just come really quickly to this one, which is the idea of using something like Loom or screencasting, which is a really cool way for students to actually demonstrate that they're knowing, they are actually explaining what they're doing. So if they have to do something like computer programming in some way, Loom can actually, you can see the little picture of me and I'm presenting, you know, using Loom, but they could be presenting something on their computer and you can actually see them doing the presentation themselves and they can record that, which is kind of fun. And again, that can be in multiple means of representation. I'm not going to go any further. I knew I wouldn't get through everything today, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to see that there are some different ways that you can actually present your content, and that you may have some different ways that you can also use these multiple means of representation like Edpuzzle and some of the other things that we kind of looked at quickly, that you can actually bring into your course to actually do some assessment and that formative assessment as you're doing some teaching. So I'm just going to check in quickly. Is there a new tool that I presented this afternoon that you think you'd like to try in one of your courses, which is really what the micro teaching is all about, is giving you an opportunity to try some new tools. Edpuzzle, great. All right, so I got one person saying the Loom idea, so you can actually see the student. Edpuzzle seems neat. So this is what we're hoping, is that you'll pick up a couple of little tools like this in this session.